Hello, I'm Janelle Benjamin, and welcome to another episode of White and Woke at Work. I'm here today with Sally Casterton, all the way from the UK. She's a financial services professional there, and I'm happy to have her on today. Sally, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Janelle. It's a pleasure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
Good. The weather has turned. I think last time we spoke it was nice and hot. And it's now, yeah, we're definitely in autumn, and I'm out of denial that summer's finished, because I think it has. So
That's
good. Otherwise good. Yeah.
And how is your work life going? I understand you are currently on a journey to becoming an active anti-racist. Tell me a little bit about that.
Wow. Yeah, where to start? Yeah, it's been I suppose for me, my personal life and my professional life and my inner world and the outer world all coming together, I suppose. I suppose I've always had a sense of kind of fairness and what's just and unjust, and what you might call a social conscience. But it hasn't been something that I've necessarily been very active about. And as a consequence of events in my personal life and my own personal development and personal growth, I came to a point where I suppose I realised how the situation really is compared to how I thought it was, and the assumptions I've made over the years about how the world is, and where we are with racism and sexism and other things. So it's been a part of that, really, and yeah, it's a huge journey, but yeah, I see it as a lifelong journey. So yes,
where did the journey begin for you, Sally? Where do you think was the kind of tipping point or moment of transformation for you, where you went from just kind of going about your day-to-day life, not paying attention to the issues of social justice or social activism, and then kind of changing over? What do you think was the catalyst?
I think for me, it was what happened to Belly Majinga in the UK, which was sometime a couple of months before George Floyd, which seems to have been a catalyst for a lot of people. But for me, it was earlier. I think that was my tipping point, where I'd felt a building frustration with certain injustices, and I think her case, for me, that was my kind of tipping point emotionally for me. I think
that case, for those who don't necessarily know. Sure. What happened in that case? Give us a little synopsis.
Yeah. So Belly Majinga was a ticket office worker in the UK in London, at Victoria Station, which, if you've been to London, you've probably been through Victoria Station. And she was originally from Democratic Republic of Congo. And a man who was a white man who was older than her spat on her and a colleague during the COVID epidemic quite early on. And she subsequently contracted COVID-19, and she passed away. And there was a lot of questions because the man who spat at her said, I've got COVID when he did it. So this was it was an assault that was, I think it was obviously physically horrible, a disgusting thing to do. But I think psychologically as well, I think that was a horrible thing to do to another person. And I think there was a lot of debate around, well, in the end, it was proven that he didn't have coronavirus, therefore she contracted it another way, and, therefore maybe it's not so bad. And that just doesn't ring true for me. And I think, I read an article that was questioning, well, was this, a racist attack? Was this racially motivated? And I think for me as a white person, my view is that if you assault a black person, you cannot say that you don't know how that will be perceived. Yes. Therefore, to me, that is are racist, you know, racially motivated, is racist in its nature. And I think the delay in any kind of investigation by her employer took weeks and weeks. And in the end, this man was sort of released with no charge. They said, well, we couldn't prove you had COVID. There aren't enough witnesses. There isn't enough evidence to prosecute. And
so this happened in a workplace setting.
Yes.
Oh.
So there were questions as to whether she was being sufficiently protected at work, because she was asked to work outside the ticket office, which is normally behind glass, without PPE. You know, so her employer hadn't taken sufficient steps. And you know, and it raises that question. You know, here's a black employee who's presumably, you know, working class and all of those things, and she's a woman, and her life, you know, there was no, it wasn't reported to the British Transport Police for weeks to investigate, you know. And I think, and I think for me, one of the things that struck me the most, aside from all of those things, was the message for her daughter, who she's left behind, you know, who's 11 and has seen her mother, you know, she's a woman, she's black, you know, presumably she's working class, you know, and the message that, you know, that what happened to her mother just perhaps doesn't matter, isn't important. And I think that made me weep. And I think so. That for me was the moment where I sort of thought, you know, this is this really still happening so often, you know, in 2020. You know, I suppose it was disbelief initially that, you know, this is still happening. And then, if you know, a couple of months later with George Floyd, I mean, I was already there. I was already, for me, volcanic. So yeah, that was just another just more fuel on the fire, really.
And I think I met you during that kind of volcanic eruption that you've had, where you know, you've come to this awareness, and you've gotten really, really vocal and activist online. So tell me a little bit about that. In particular, your post where you yourself wrote about your experiences having to apologize to a Black woman in the workplace.
Yeah, I think, in terms of my actions and you know, I suppose there are certain phases that we're kind of going through, and I suppose initially it was shock, it was disbelief, it was kind of a reckoning with myself, that, you know, wondering why I hadn't kind of fully seen how things are before. And something not fully conscious, you know, becoming conscious, and coming to terms with my own assumptions that I had made, and my own ignorance. And I suppose for me that there was that frustration of, well, what can I do? You know, I know I can't fix this on my own. You know, I wish I could, but that something has to be done, because I thought things were being done. And in my view, clearly they're not. It's got to that point where I'm thinking, okay, you know, the Commission for Racial Equality in the UK was established in 1976, which is the year before I was born. And I think, what have they been doing? So, you know, for 40 odd years, you know, honestly, what, and so I think, and sometimes you think, well, if they are not affecting change, you know, what can I do? What can anyone else do? And I think for me, I really struggled with what I can do. I think partly because I run my own consultancy now, so I'm not within a large or medium-sized organization anymore.
Right.
You know, so I thought, well, I can't go marching up to HR or knocking on the door of the chief exec or anything like that. In such a direct way in the workplace. And so it was like, well, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I think also because I'm recovering from chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, as it's also known. And so I was thinking, well, okay, I don't necessarily have a lot of energy either. You know, I can't necessarily go on marches and protests and so for me, in terms of the social media and writing, was my way of kind of finding what I could do, because I think we all have different roles, don't we, and different things that we can do depending on who we are and what our circumstances are.
Yeah.
And for me, I thought, well, actually, it seems that when I kind of speak from the heart and write from the heart, it seems to speak to other people, and it you know, it won't speak to everybody, but if it resonates with one or two people who might think maybe differently about things, or inspire others to just think full stop, then I am doing something, you know, if I've impacted just one other person. So
I
I
love
think
that you
that's
said
where
that. I love that
yeah.
you said, you know, what can I do? Because that's really what this anti-racist actions, what these should be about, right? It's what can we do as
Yeah.
individuals in our particular sphere of influence, using our skills and abilities to affect change. And I like that you,
Yeah.
you know, you address that from somebody who has an illness, you know, who is white, who isn't in the traditional workspace, still finding your voice, still finding a way in which you can affect change. And the piece you wrote, Sally, it really did speak to me about, you know, your apology to the Black woman that you didn't hire. I want you to talk a little bit about that, and then you know, I'll share with you how it made me feel or impacted me.
I think for me, I think a lot of this this sort of journey, if you will, there is a lot of shame comes with it, and I think when you realize that you haven't seen the world as thing, you know, you haven't seen things as they truly are, that's very difficult, especially when it's in relation to suffering and like unnecessary pain that, you know, that I see people are going through, and I've been blissfully unaware. I think that's really quite difficult to come to terms with, but it's also part of the process has been reviewing my life so far through a different lens, kind of looking back differently, and reinterpreting certain things, and certain kind of events or scenarios kind of replay sort of in my mind, and I'm sort of trying to make sense of things, really, in the light of what I now know, that, you know, that the world is actually very different to the way I thought it was. And that's where that article came from. That letter was to do with recruitment, because this was something that I'd been thinking about. I was thinking, well, my gosh, when it comes to opportunity and bias and unconscious bias and our automatic thoughts, and, you know, and recruitment as a process, you know, there are so many, there's kind of multiple points of failure potentially, I think, in that process, you know, from where you advertise for a role through to who you select for an interview, then, you know, who gets through to a second interview, all those things. And then you kind of come through to kind of retention and people management as well. So it made me question my working life as a people manager. I think particularly because I have a reputation as an excellent people manager. And I thought, but if I've missed this, you know, then it's something for me to review. And basically with that kind of context in mind, you know, I've sort of questioned, you know, how many Black people have I interviewed, or how many people have I rejected, or, you know, and kind of questioning that and saying, was there bias involved, you know, conscious or unconscious? What about the processes have you know, failed Black people, and have I failed, you know, Black people, you know, in the course of my work? And I think this particular woman kept coming to mind, and I kept thinking, why does I keep kind of seeing her face, and there's something about her, and kind of, and remembering her energy, and I hadn't given her the job. I'd appointed somebody else who kind of seemed to have the edge at that point.
Right.
But my mind just kept going back to this woman, and I think it was the culmination of me having having learnt more about what it means to be Black and to be a Black woman in the workplace, and I think I suppose I treated recruitment as if it were a level playing field,
Right.
which, you know, well, I'm not racist, I'm not biased, you know, I try not to be, and I think I'm being really fair.
Yes.
And I think it's that concept of equity as well as equality. And I think what, for me at that time, this interview sort of 10 or so years ago, I couldn't understand why this woman was so keen to work with me. And I think that's what was niggling at me. I think, because she was so keen, you know, why, you know, why was she so keen to work with me? And I think at the time, my self-esteem wasn't what it is now. Now I would say, well, yes, anyone would be glad to work with me. Of course they would. Of course she's keen. But then I didn't understand it, because she was more keen than the average person. And I think that's what it was in her particular case, that I kept going back to. And I think, I suppose it's that understanding now that I assumed that workplaces were largely kind of psychologically safe spaces,
Right.
and that what I offered was available most other places. And I thought, well, maybe some places there's racism still, but you know, but largely no. And you know, I now see that I was completely wrong, and it's the other way around. And so I think that gave some context for me, retrospectively, as to where she was perhaps coming from. That, you know, perhaps when we met, she perceived that I was, you know, was going to be a fair person to work with. And I think, yeah, that's what I realised, and also realising what Black women have to offer specifically, because we're not all the same, you know, and those qualities too, and saying, well, actually, you know, I missed something here that, you know, I could have offered a safe space, and you know, she may well have been one of the best employers I'd ever had, right, you know, had I given her the role. So yeah, so with hindsight, it's a wonderful thing. What at the time felt like a completely fair decision, you know, in hindsight was probably the wrong one, you know, and she was eminently appointable. So yeah, I think it was that apology that I didn't see her fully for who she was and what she had to offer. I think it was quite difficult to come to terms with, and I think, yeah, that's why I felt that kind of open apology might be helpful in some way, because by explaining those circumstances, it would potentially help others to think about what they've done in the past, you know, that we thought was fair and perhaps wasn't, and what we could do in the future as well.
I totally
and I think
appreciated you doing that.
Yeah.
I totally appreciate you doing that, just because, and you said a lot just a little while ago. I just want to unpack a little bit, because, you know, you talked about just the concept of equity and doing what's fair and right, but at the same time, you know, missing the mark in terms of considering what might have been the best approach from an equity perspective. And I think all too often employers are missing that piece, that consideration, right? That when they see a person of color before them, you know, BIPOC or BAME or in the UK, they're missing the mark if they're not considering that aspect of the candidate before them, precisely because they can bring a richness and a diversity to the workplace, considerations that didn't previously thought about. So yes, when you wrote that piece, it really spoke to me and some of the experiences that I've gone through of marginalization in the workplace, or getting passed over for opportunities where I knew that I was the best and the brightest, but still, you know, the recruiter, they failed to see me, the hiring manager, whoever it is, they failed to see my unique value and what I could bring. And so I appreciate you saying that and writing that. And I think it was a very powerful piece that resonated with a lot of people. Have you gotten great feedback since you wrote it?
I have, yeah. I have, and I think it's been interesting, you know, that white people have said, "My gosh, that really has made me think," and you know, which is a good thing. You know, whatever comes of our thinking, I think the fact that we think is a good thing, and I think, and I've certainly had responses from other Black people who've really appreciated it. I think, and perhaps in the way that you have, that you know, it's something that I think some women have felt they needed to hear. You know, someone say, actually, you know, I see you now. And yeah, and you know, things need to change and need to be different. And you know, just because we think we're doing the right thing, we think we're being fair, it doesn't mean we are.
Yes.
And I think in that whole piece of, you know, about recruitment, I now see ways in which the kind of recruitment can fail candidates, you know, that I didn't see before. Yes. You know, and it's opened up for me kind of other kind of biases that I have had, which I now I'm aware of now, as to how I may have excluded people previously, on various grounds that, you know, I would hope I wouldn't now. So,
and it's good that you're actively, you know, you're coming to grips with that, the awareness, right? And then you're actively trying to kind of re-educate yourself, right, on the things that you should know, and the things that you should do now that you have that awareness. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, you know, what it was like for you before you had this awakening, right? Like what your worldview might have been, what your family life and orientation might have been, and what informed your thinking previously.
I suppose it's mainly informed by the fact that I was white and I didn't have to think about race.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what does it mean to you to be white, Sally? Just am.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. So yeah, a privileged existence in that respect. I think I have always been committed to treating people fairly and taking people as I find them, which I think is important. And that's something I think I got from my grandfather on my mother's side, he was a very fair man, and he was ahead of his time in terms of his thinking on equality, you know, for women and kind of gay people, you know, LGBTQ people, all that kind of stuff. So he was very ahead of his time, and I think he was a really good role model for me. And he was an excellent kind of people man. You know, he understood people, and he kind of was striving to always be fair. And I think in my my secondary school was very diverse, was very in terms of the cohort of pupils. So we were it was an independent, selective, private school, and it was had a very strongly feminist ethos, and that was running through everything we did. And I think that was incredibly positive. And I think in terms of racism, in terms of schooling, my feeling, and I would have to go back and ask girls of colour how they experienced it, but for me, my understanding was that if I or anyone had said anything racist or had any kind of racist views, it felt as though you'd have kind of 29 other girls in the room turn to you and say, "What?" You know, to me, it feels like that would just not have flown at all. It just wasn't. It wouldn't have been entertained. I mean, the curriculum, no, was not. I would say now was not inclusive enough, and the teaching staff was not diverse enough. No, so I would think potentially pastoral care was not enough either, and possibly still isn't now. But in terms of amongst ourselves, it seemed to me that, racism wasn't an issue. And I assumed that then, as I sort of became an adult and started my life, that everybody felt that way from that point of view. So it was a double-edged sword. I think it meant that I was always striving to be fair in what I was doing in the world, but it also meant that my eyes were closed to the reality of how many people do not agree with me. So yeah, I think that's when perhaps that the kind of sense of fairness and came from, and that was despite at the same time the influence of my father, his side of the family. He and his mother were horrendous, overt racists. So it was quite interesting, kind of my two parents and the difference between each side of the family. And I suppose in some ways you kind of pick a side, don't you? And I felt ashamed of the things my dad would say and the things his mother would say and do. So yeah, that was quite difficult. But I think I perhaps minimized that because I didn't wish to identify with that or associate with that. I didn't agree with that. So again, you might say, well, surely if your own father and grandmother were that racist, how did you not know that other people were? And I think that's still something I'm trying to understand. But I think it was the fact that I didn't identify with that, and I was ashamed of it, really. So I put that to one side, I suppose.
Did you ever feel like you had the power to correct them in the moment, to say, I don't agree, or you shouldn't really say that, or oh please, I know we've got these cringy moments when people say something that we're uncomfortable with, but did you find your voice at that time with this feminist kind of schooling and speak your mind, or did you kind of expect that this is what family life is like and then just kind of dismiss it?
It's a really good question. We didn't see my dad's parents very often, so we visited maybe once or twice a year. And what I knew of her in terms of racism is largely what's been told to me by my mother. So I can't remember witnessing her being racist apart from the TV. If a black person came on the TV, bang, she would switch it off. And I think I was quite shocked by that. And I think also I was probably 8, 9, 10 at the time. And I think there's something about, you respect your elders and you don't speak back. And I think at that time in my life, I don't remember speaking back or speaking out about it. But I remember the feeling. I remember feeling ashamed and embarrassed. But I didn't have a voice at that point to kind of speak up. And I think the same with my dad. I think the most I managed to do was glare at him. He's not the most approachable man anyway. So that's difficult. And I think it's probably hasn't been until probably my 30s and now my 40s that I now will kind of clap back at people and really kind of go for it, which I think it's partly self-confidence, maybe. I think it's partly kind of age. I think you don't care what people think anymore. You're maybe not so afraid of conflict. Whereas in my younger years, I probably wouldn't have wanted the conflict. So yeah, I think
this is important because part of what I'm hoping to achieve through this series is just allowing people to realize and know how to respond in the moment. And it is challenging, right, to give that clap back in the moment, and we can't always do it depending on the power imbalance, right? In your own family, you've got this imbalance going on with your father, your grandmother, the principles of respect your elders, and it causes some of us to lose our voice. So it's great that you do feel that empowered right now at this time of your life.
Yeah.
And you
Mm.
mentioned just the other day, just having this long protracted debate with someone even online, where you had to kind of clap back. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
It was exhausting. It was best part of 5 hours. I think that was it. It was very challenging, actually, and it's the first time I've kind of challenged racism, or the perception that that it isn't a problem, all that. It's the first time I've kind of challenged that, and been left feeling really quite fragile afterwards. And I think it's partly or mainly because of the relationship between that person and me. And I think it's more personal when it's somebody you know and you care about and who cares about you. And it can also be more shocking because you can find with friends, family, partners, you're assuming that other people will feel the same way that you do.
Yeah.
We do, and so it's an unpleasant shock if you find that they don't agree with you. And instinctively, I think we can judge someone's character, in that way, and it can really change how we view one another, I think.
That level of openness also has to be there. They have to be ready to receive the information and the knowledge. Like you said, like you had an awakening, and I think that moment has to be deeply personal. And when the light bulb kind of switches on, it happens for everyone, right? Even people of color, racialized people, Black people, we all have these moments where something happens to us to change our worldview, to awaken us, right? To justice, right? Where we're either going to push back against it, or we're going to, lose our voice in some cases. So Sally, tell me a little bit about the roadblocks or the challenges that white people might find to taking some anti-racist actions in their spheres of influence. What barriers might they face?
Many. I think it can be difficult. You can find that you can be criticised for perhaps not looking professional in certain people's opinions on, by talking about racism and anti-racism in kind of professional spaces. And I think you've got to kind of ignore that. That's coming from people's own place of fear, because socially we don't necessarily want to kind of step out of line, and kind of put ourselves out there and say, actually, this is what I believe in, this is what I'm all about, here's what I think. There's a lot of fear around, oh gosh, you might lose business, or people might not want to work with you, and I think you just have to keep a rational head and say, well, if anybody sees that I am striving to be anti-racist and they don't want to work with me, then I wouldn't think we would work well together anyway. It wouldn't be a productive working relationship, for either of us. So I think there's a lot of fear mongering in that respect. And I think in terms of kind of social acceptance, we all kind of crave approval and acceptance, and you don't get it necessarily, if you're white and you're doing anti-racism work, you're and speaking up, you don't necessarily get approval or support, so it can feel quite lonely. So you can feel like, well, where is everyone? You might assume that you'd have support from friends and family, and partners, so that can be quite difficult when you find that partners and friends and family and colleagues don't necessarily feel the same way that you do. And certainly from kind of conversations I've had with others on a similar journey, it can really challenge your personal relationships. You know, you can find that your partner doesn't see things the way you do, doesn't think it's so important, or doesn't care the way you do. And actually, that in the context of you know, a romantic relationship and your partnership, that's really quite foundational, you know, because this is, you know, this isn't politics, it's human rights, isn't it? And you know, so that is really fundamental. It's more fundamental than whether you're voting for Biden or Trump. You know, or, and that, you know, this is far more, this is a much deeper level, you know, to be disagreeing on, or to find your partner actually doesn't maybe feel the same way you do. So yeah, there's a whole world of difficulty. And I think also as a woman, sometimes when you're speaking up, men don't necessarily want to hear it, and that can be quite difficult. So yeah, there's yeah, and yeah,
how have you
there are a lot of barriers.
How have you overcome some of those barriers in your personal life and in your work life?
I think in terms of my work life, I don't come from a place of kind of scarcity. I don't sort of think, oh no, you know, I might lose clients, or I might not win work, or that doesn't really resonate with me, because, you know, there are hundreds and thousands and millions of businesses in the world that I can work with. So I don't view potential clients as a scarce resource. So I'm kind of not coming from that point of view. And I think it's actually more positive to be open about who you are and what you represent. And, you know, it's that being freedom to be authentic, and the courage to be authentic as well about who you are. And actually, I've made so many really lovely connections since I've been speaking about all this stuff. So I think it just goes to show that, you know, if you are authentic and you take action, you know, you find your tribe and all that, you know, you find like-minded people. So yeah, and I think, you know, on a personal level, I think you have to not care for approval from other people. I think, and I think that's true in life generally. Yes. You know, if we're doing things for praise or approval, we're not quite getting life right. So I think we do have to have the courage to do things, you know, knowing we might be criticised, ignored, shunned. You know, we might be out of the in-group, but just knowing that actually it doesn't mean anything anyway in the end. So.
Who cares?
Exactly, who cares? I don't care. If I know I'm doing the right thing, you know, why would I care what anybody else thinks? You know, I have faith in myself. I know my heart. I know where I'm coming from. I know what I'm trying to do. I know who I am. So yeah, I think, yeah.
This work is courageous. It takes a courageous individual, that's for sure.
I think so. I think anyone speaking up, you know, it does take courage, and sharing your experiences, you know, Black voices. I you know, that also is very courageous, because, you know, you're sharing very deep hurts a lot of the time, and you know, that is, I'm not having to share mine, am I? You know, so it's kind of a different type of courage, isn't it? You know, we kind of different barriers and kind of different voices for different kind of purposes, and you know, I think the courage is required of all of us, really, and the courage to keep going, you know, when it feels like maybe no one's listening, or no one supports you, or no one cares, or, you know, I think that just the courage to just keep going anyway, and say, well, I do know people are seeing this. Yes. You know, it, you know, even if they're not commenting or engaging, I know there are lurkers. There are lurkers. In the world, there are many lurkers. There sure are. They're seeing it. And that's all I need to know. So long as people are seeing it, you know, I don't need, you know, it's that thing, you know, you don't need approval or loads of feedback. You just need to know that people are seeing it, reading it, hearing it, taking it in, and that it's simmering away on some level. that
So
will kind of create that change.
How do you know, Sally, that you're in this for the long haul, that you're not going to just retreat after some time and go back to the status quo? How do you fundamentally know that this is a lifelong journey for you?
It's hard to describe. All I can say is that my feeling is that this is bigger than me.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's a combination of my kind of one of my core values being that kind of sense of fairness and justice, which, you know, can be born out of, you know, injustices in my own life, and empathy. You know, I think if you have empathy for other human beings and compassion, you know, you can't see this and see how it really is, and unsee it. I can't. I can't unsee what I've seen and unfeel what I've felt. So yeah, there's no question to me that it's something I will keep doing till it's done.
That's good.
Yeah, the end of my life if need be, but yeah, it's bigger than me. That's all I can say. Really.
So what are some, I guess, immediate next steps or things that you want to tackle? What do you want to do next?
Definitely more writing, and I've got various little projects that are sort of simmering away, and ideas with various different people. Yeah, I think in terms of I think one thing that's very important is providing safe spaces for white people to talk amongst themselves, where they're maybe not worried about saying the wrong thing or getting it wrong, and kind of can develop the courage to speak about race openly, to, you know, to not be afraid of admitting to having made mistakes or done things wrong, or not realize, and not, you know, because there is that degree of shame that we feel, and I think we need to feel enough that we take action and do something, but not so much that we then shut down and can become defensive, or we can get stuck in thinking, you know, how bad we must be as a person, and that kind of thing. And I think it doesn't help to kind of to sit in that for too long. No. Because it doesn't matter how I feel, how awful I feel, or, you know, obviously our feelings are important. It's important information, but most important is actions that we're taking, whatever they are, you know, large or small. It's the actions that will make a difference, not, you know, not the feelings on their own. It's they have to lead to an action, I think. So yeah, I think it's important to have that space, perhaps, to get conversation started. So that's something that I'm looking at.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you do. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do next. And if I can support that in any way, let me know. You're welcome to come back to the show.
I'm at your disposal. I will always come back. I always have a lot to say.
Thank you so much, Sally. It has truly been a pleasure working with you, and we'll definitely do this again soon.